She only replaced her sick uncle for one day as a driver. But when a millionaire CEO stepped into her van, her entire life changed forever. The rain had just started to fall when Bryslyn Gray adjusted the cracked rearview mirror of the battered Ford Transit, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the steering wheel. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, louder than the dull thuds of raindrops on the windshield. The oversized navy blue blazer swallowed her slender frame, the sleeves hanging awkwardly past her wrists. It smelled faintly of aftershave and old leather, a scent she knew well. It was her Uncle Melvin's. 60 years old and stubborn as a mule, Uncle Melvin had been driving for over 30 years, not limousines or flashy town cars, just working-class transportation, deliveries, airport runs, sometimes chauffeuring rich clients when his old boss needed a backup. Bryslin had never imagined sitting in his seat, let alone pretending to be him. But that morning, everything changed. 2 days ago, she had found him collapsed in their tiny kitchen trailer, clutching his chest and gasping for breath. The paramedics said it was a mild heart attack. He'd survived, thank God. But the hospital bills had already started piling up. They had no savings, just a few $100 in a coffee tin and some uncashed checks Melvin had stashed away in the pantry. When she visited him that morning, he had whispered hoarsely, "One more client, Bryce, just one. Edgeworth Tower. Fancy guy, tight schedule. Drives a hard bargain, but tips well. You do it for me, yeah?" She hesitated. "Uncle Mel, so I've never driven anyone like that. What if I mess up?" His hand, trembling, closed around hers. "You won't. You're tougher than you think. Just act like you belong. Use my badge. Keep your eyes forward. Don't say too much." So here she was now, soaked in nerves and rainwater, pulling up to the black iron gates of a luxury brownstone on the north side of Indianapolis, where the client waited. She rolled down the window to speak into the intercom, her voice shaky but controlled. "Pick up for Mr. Landon Crow," she said. There was a pause, followed by a loud buzz, and the gates slowly creaked open. The driveway was immaculate. Polished stone, trimmed hedges, two carved lions flanking the steps to the main entrance. She parked exactly where Melvin had noted in his journal. "Always stop at the third stripe," he had scribbled in blue pen. He notices everything. The front door opened sharply. Bryslyn's breath hitched. The man who stepped out didn't match any of her mental images of a rich executive. He was young, maybe mid-30s, with perfectly tailored charcoal slacks, a dark overcoat that caught the wind, and a stare as sharp as cut glass. His jet-black hair was slicked back, not a strand out of place. He moved with an intensity that felt almost military. And when his pale gray eyes met hers through the windshield, it was like he instantly knew something was off. Still, he said nothing. He slid into the back seat, placed a leather briefcase beside him, and snapped curtly, "Edgeworth Tower! No stops!" "Yes, sir," she replied quickly, adjusting the rear view to avoid eye contact. The first few blocks were silent, save for the sound of the wipers screeching across the windshield. Bryslyn tried to keep her breathing even, focusing on the road, on the directions she had written down on a yellow sticky note pasted next to the gear shift, but her nerves were spiking. She took a right onto Jefferson Avenue, just like the GPS instructed, but something wasn't right. A sudden flash of brake lights ahead caught her attention, and within seconds, traffic had slowed to a crawl. Police tape fluttered on the far end of the bridge. A wreck. "No, no, no," she whispered, her voice barely audible. From the back, she heard the man shift. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. There's a detour ahead. Accident on the bridge," she replied. "You should have gone through Marlowe Street." I didn't know. I'm sorry, sir. I'll reroute right away." She felt his eyes on the back of her neck. There was a pause so long it made her stomach twist. Then, the sharp edge returned to his voice. "You're not Melvin!" Bryslyn's hands froze on the wheel. Silence sat between them like a brick wall. She could feel the weight of it, her chest tightening, her throat dry. She knew this moment would come. No," she whispered. "I'm not. He's in the hospital. I'm his niece. He asked me to cover for him. Just this once." Another silence. "You're not a driver." "No, sir." "So what are you?" She swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't look away from the road. The truth spilled out before she could stop it. "I'm just someone who needed a job today. So my uncle doesn't lose his apartment. So the hospital doesn't discharge him early. I'm sorry if I wasted your time. I'll pull over." The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back into his seat. Bryslin braced herself for the yelling, the insults, the call to her uncle's old boss. Instead, after a long pause, she heard him mutter something unexpected. "Keep driving." Her eyes widened. "Sir, you're late, but I've seen worse. Just don't miss another turn." Bryslin didn't speak again. She turned left at the next intersection and re-entered the main road. But this time, her heartbeat was slower. She didn't know who this man really was, but she had a feeling this morning's mistake had just started something much bigger. The rain had faded into a light drizzle by the time Bryslin pulled up in front of the soaring glass tower known as Edgeworth. It was the kind of place where dreams were either made or crushed, where suits with power walked like kings, and where a single meeting could shift the course of entire industries. She had never been near a building like this before. The entrance was flanked by marble lions, digital security panels, and a gold-etched plaque bearing the name Crowtech Industries. Landon Crow stepped out of the van without another word. He didn't slam the door, but the silence of it closing felt heavier than steel. Bryslin let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her knuckles were still tight on the wheel, and the air in the car smelled like nervous sweat and aged leather. She quickly pulled over to the side of the building and parked. She hadn't planned to wait for him, but she also didn't know what else to do. She was technically still working, though she had no real idea what protocol was, for a stand-in driver impersonating her uncle. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it, curling up slightly in the seat, rubbing her hands together to warm them. 37 minutes later, the side door opened again. He slid into the back seat just as smoothly as before, though now he looked less severe, more distracted. He was holding a folder with several documents and tapping his fingers against the leather strap of his watch. She started the engine, but before pulling away, she glanced into the rearview mirror. His eyes were already on her. "You waited." She hesitated. "Yes, sir." "Why?" A lump formed in her throat. "I didn't know if you'd need another ride, or if someone else would come. I didn't want to assume." For a moment, he said nothing. Then, almost absently, he muttered, "Most people do assume. Often, too much." She didn't answer. She focused on the road, driving with precision now. The detour earlier still haunted her. She knew she couldn't mess this up again. As the car glided smoothly through the quiet, rain-soaked streets, he spoke again, this time in a slightly different tone. "What's your name?" She blinked. He hadn't asked before. He hadn't even seemed to care. "Bryslin," she said, her voice cautious. He nodded slightly. "Bryslin. That's unusual." "My mother liked rare names," she said, unsure why she even offered that. "I can tell." They fell into silence again, but this time, it didn't feel quite so tense. The city moved around them in slow motion, early morning traffic thinning out, neon reflections in puddles blurring like watercolor. Bryslin began to feel the strangest thing. Calm. When they reached his next destination, a tall, nondescript office building with dark-tinted windows, he stepped out, then paused and turned toward her window. "You're not a professional," he said flatly. She nodded, already expecting the dismissal. "I know. You're not very polished either." "I know that too. But you're honest. That's rare, especially in my world." Her eyes lifted toward him, not quite understanding. "I have another appointment in 3 hours. Pick me up here. If you're late again, I won't be so forgiving." And just like that, he disappeared into the building. Bryslin sat frozen for several seconds. Her pulse had sped up again, but not with fear this time. It was something else. Something harder to name. She killed the engine, leaned back in her seat, and closed her eyes for a moment. Her heart was still pounding. How had this even happened? She was just a girl trying to keep her uncle's life from unraveling. And now she was sitting outside skyscrapers, waiting on a man whose watch probably cost more than everything she owned. But as absurd as it seemed, he had asked for her. Not someone else. Not a real driver. Her. And that simple fact was the first breath of hope she'd felt in months. The late afternoon sun filtered through a patchy sky as Bryslin pulled up in front of the same office building, her hands steady on the wheel this time. She had cleaned the van's interior with wet wipes from the gas station, swept the floor with a brush she borrowed from a neighbor, and even scrubbed a coffee stain off the seat with baking soda. It still didn't look great, but it was better. She wore a fresh shirt and tied her hair back into a neater bun, trying to look a little less like a fraud. 3 hours had passed since Landon Crow's last words to her, and they echoed in her head like a ticking clock. "If you're late again, I won't be so forgiving." She had arrived 20 minutes early. When the glass door slid open and he stepped out again, This time with his coat unbuttoned and his phone pressed to his ear, he looked more like a man descending from a war room than a board meeting. His expression was unreadable. Hard eyes, furrowed brows, lips that didn't move unless necessary. He ended the call with a sharp swipe, slid into the car, and said, "Drive." No destination, no greeting. Brycelyn started the engine. She waited for directions, but he said nothing. After a few seconds, she asked quietly, "Where to, sir?" Landon exhaled through his nose, like he'd forgotten she wasn't a mind reader. Crotech campus, West Gate. She merged onto the highway, her focus narrowed like a blade. The silence between them wasn't quite hostile this time, but it was thick, like he carried storm clouds inside him, barely holding the thunder back. About halfway through the drive, a question formed in her mind. She tried to ignore it, but curiosity had always been her flaw. "Is it hard?" she asked, barely above a whisper. His eyes flicked up from the phone in his hand. "What?" "Running an empire like that. Being in charge of so many people. Knowing every decision you make could affect lives." He stared at her through the mirror for a moment. She was sure he wouldn't answer. But then, yes, it's exhausting and lonely, but necessary. That last word lingered in the air like a brick. Brycelyn nodded slightly. "You don't seem like someone who lets anyone help." "I don't," he said immediately. A pause. "But here you are, letting a stranger drive you around," she said carefully. His lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but not entirely cold. "My usual driver's out of the country. The other one is incompetent. You're the lesser gamble." She almost smiled at that. They drove the rest of the way in silence, but it was lighter now. There was something about the vulnerability of his earlier answer. Simple, honest, that made her see him differently. He wasn't just a high tower in a suit. He was a man bearing weight, maybe even pain. When they arrived at the west gate of the Crotech campus, security buzzed them in without question. Brycelyn pulled up to the executive wing, unsure if this would be her last trip with him. She expected him to say goodbye and walk away. Instead, he opened his briefcase, pulled out a white envelope, and placed it gently on the center console between them. "For Melvin," he said. "It's from the company's private medical assistance program. He's been a good contractor for years. I never bothered to check his file until today." She stared at it in disbelief. "Is this a check?" "No. It's a letter of admission to a private cardiac care facility, paid for. He'll get the best doctors and the rehab he needs." She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Her fingers trembled as they touched the envelope. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep showing up," he said without looking at her. "I could use someone who doesn't flinch when things go wrong." Then he stepped out just like that, briefcase in hand, his coat catching the wind again as he disappeared through the glass doors of his corporate kingdom. Brycelyn sat there, stunned, the envelope pressed to her chest. That was the moment something shifted. Something unspoken, fragile, and utterly unexpected had formed between them. It wasn't friendship yet, and it wasn't trust, not fully, but it was something. And for the first time since her parents died, since her uncle fell sick, since she thought life had abandoned her for good, she felt chosen. It had been almost 3 weeks since Brycelyn first took the wheel of her uncle's van, and the life she had known before felt like a fading memory. What began as a one-time favor had turned into a quiet, unpredictable routine. Every morning, she would pull up to Landon Crow's residence precisely at 7:15 a.m., wearing clean clothes, her hair neatly tied, her face calm, though her thoughts were often turbulent. He would enter the van without a greeting, sometimes muttering directions, sometimes tapping away on his phone without saying a word. And yet, each day, something in his demeanor subtly softened. He had not only continued to request her as his driver, he had also begun giving her small tasks, picking up documents, calling ahead to meetings, even helping reschedule things when he ran late. Brycelyn quickly realized these weren't random errands. They were tests. Landon Crow, the tech world phantom, didn't trust easily. He observed her constantly as if he were trying to solve a puzzle no one else could see. That morning, the van rolled down a quiet stretch of country road just outside the city, heading toward one of Crotech's hidden properties, an R&D facility nestled behind a curtain of trees. Brycelyn had never been out this far with him before. She broke the silence as they passed a sun-dappled cornfield. "Do you ever stop?" He looked up from his tablet, his expression neutral. "Stop what?" "Working, planning, building?" Do you ever just stop and breathe? He turned to face the window again. Stopping is dangerous. When you pause, that's when regrets start creeping in. Her hands tightened around the wheel. So, you run from them? I manage them. She nodded slowly, watching the road. You carry a lot on your shoulders. I can feel it. He didn't respond. Not immediately. But when he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rawer. Have you ever made a mistake so big, so final, that even your money couldn't fix it? She looked at him through the mirror. His face was unreadable, but his eyes weren't. They looked haunted. My mom overdosed when I was 10, she said quietly. My uncle was the only one who took me in. I spent 2 years in foster care before that. There were nights I thought I'd never feel safe again. Was that my mistake? No, but I still carry the blame sometimes. He turned to her then, eyes narrowing, not in judgment, but in recognition. I had a sister, he said, Avery. Brilliant, reckless. She was 4 years younger. Everyone said I was the golden one. She hated that, thought no one ever saw her. He paused, his fingers curled around the edge of his coat. She got into trouble. Drugs, mostly. I thought cutting her off would force her to wake up. I thought withholding money would make her come back to me for help. But she didn't. She OD'd in a cheap motel in Kansas 6 years ago. The van fell silent. Bryslin felt her throat tighten. She hadn't expected him to share this. Not now. Not ever. The man who moved through life like a fortress had just opened a hidden door. I'm sorry, she said softly. He nodded once, barely. She had a daughter, he continued. 2 years old when Avery died. Social services took her. But she vanished in the system. Every lead turned into a dead end. Her heart skipped. You're still looking? I never stopped. For a while, neither of them spoke. The road stretched ahead, flanked by tall trees and long shadows. A hawk circled in the sky above, as if silently witnessing the confession that had just passed between them. Then, gently, she asked, And all this, Crotech, the expansion, the grind, is it about finding her? He stared out the window again. It's about control, about building something that can't collapse, something that can't be taken away. Bryslin drove the rest of the way in thoughtful silence. When they reached the facility, Landon paused at the door before stepping out. Thank you for not pretending to understand, he said. Most people either try to fix me or use me. I'm not most people, she replied softly. He looked back at her. For once, his features weren't guarded. They were tired, human, wounded. No, you're not. He left without another word, and the door clicked shut behind him. As she sat alone in the van, Bryslin felt a strange ache in her chest. Not for herself, but for him. A man who seemed to own everything, and yet had lost something irreplaceable. She thought back to her uncle, still recovering, to the nights she spent crying quietly in her room when no one could hear, to the bruises invisible to the eye, and she realized they weren't so different after all. Both of them were learning how to carry pain. And maybe, just maybe, they were learning how to share it. The city skyline looked different that day, sharper, colder, as if the buildings themselves knew something was about to fall apart. Bryslin could feel it too, though she couldn't yet explain why. There was tension in the air, like a taut wire pulled to its limit, ready to snap. The moment she pulled up to Landon's brownstone, she noticed the difference. The front gate, usually half open with a silent buzz, remained firmly shut. The intercom crackled when she pressed it, then went dead. No response. Frowning, she stepped out of the van and approached on foot, her shoes clicking against the rain-damp concrete. She knocked on the front door once, then again. Finally, after several tense seconds, it opened. Landon stood there. But it wasn't the Landon she knew. His normally sharp appearance had unraveled. His white dress shirt was wrinkled, unbuttoned at the collar, his hair slightly disheveled. He didn't greet her. He didn't even move. Are you okay? She asked, instinctively lowering her voice. He blinked, almost as if realizing she was there for the first time. You shouldn't be here today. You asked me to come every morning. Well, I changed my mind. Her brows furrowed. Landon, what happened? He stepped aside without answering, and she took it as a silent invitation. Inside, the pristine interior looked untouched, but the air was heavy with something unseen. On the glass coffee table in the living room, several open folders were scattered. Printouts, photographs, company memos. She recognized the Crotech logo on many of them, but her eyes caught something else. An envelope marked, Indiana State Environmental Control Board. What is this? She asked cautiously. He walked over, his movements slower than usual, and picked up one of the documents. A formal complaint. They're launching an investigation. Someone leaked that Crotech's waste disposal in Ohio didn't meet environmental compliance. Is it true? She whispered. No. He looked at her, jaw clenched. At least, it wasn't supposed to be. He tossed the document back onto the table where it slid to the floor. This wasn't just business oversight. It was deliberate. Someone inside sabotaged our systems, redirected waste handling contracts to a shell company we never approved. Her mind raced. You're being framed. He laughed bitterly. And now the headlines are doing the rest. Green billionaire dumping waste into wetlands. It's poetic, really. She stepped closer. Have you told anyone? The board? They already started pulling back support. Partners are withdrawing, stocks falling. Half of them assume guilt before evidence. The rest are looking for someone to blame. He sat down heavily on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. They won't stop until Crotech is gutted. Bryceland had never seen him like this. Not vulnerable, not shaken. He had always been composed, intimidating in his silence. But now, stripped of all that armor, he looked exhausted, frightened, human. I can help, she said quietly. He looked up at her, frowning. How? Let me see the records. Emails, documents, contracts. I used to work part-time at a data entry firm in high school. I'm good with patterns, details. I might catch something someone missed. Landon's lips parted, as if to object, but then closed again. Something in her voice, her certainty, seemed to reach through the fog in his mind. After a beat, he nodded toward the nearby desk. There's a secure drive in that drawer. You'll need the password. Let me guess. Avery? His eyes met hers in surprise. No, her daughter's name, Adelaide. Bryceland paused. That's beautiful. He stood up slowly. I don't expect you to fix this, but if you can find anything at all, I'll listen. For the next several hours, they sat together in near silence, the glow of two computer screens illuminating the darkening room. Bryceland sifted through hundreds of files, emails between executives, vendor contracts, invoices with slightly mismatched totals. She noticed anomalies. Invoices from a contractor named Wessler Solutions popped up too often, and the address on the header didn't match any registered company in the state. She cross-referenced it with public business databases. Nothing came up. Then, she dug into archived vendor logs and found something even stranger. Wessler Solutions had only begun receiving payments after a former Crotech employee named Troy Halden was promoted to the procurement department. Bryceland's heart pounded. And Landon, look at this. He leaned over her shoulder, reading the highlighted entries. That's not one of our approved vendors, he muttered. I've never seen that name in our briefings. He's laundering contracts through it. I bet if we follow the money trail, we'll find it leads back to him, or someone else. Landon was already moving, grabbing his phone, snapping photos, forwarding them to his legal team. When he looked back at her, something in his expression shifted. Pride, maybe, or awe. You just might have saved everything, he said. She shrugged, nervous under his gaze. I just hate seeing something good being torn apart. He smiled then, a rare, genuine smile that melted something inside her. You do realize, he said. You just declared war on people who've played this game far longer than you. She raised an eyebrow. Then I guess it's a good thing I've had a rough life. I don't scare easy. For the first time in days, the storm cloud in the room began to lift. And though there was still a long fight ahead, Bryceland knew she wouldn't let him face it alone. Not anymore. The next 2 weeks unfolded like a high-stakes chess match. Every morning, Bryceland arrived at Landon's residence, not as a driver, but as an unofficial investigator, an assistant, a confidant, and at times, the only person Landon allowed close. Their lives became consumed by the unraveling mystery behind the sabotage. Sleep was scarce. Meals were occasional. The stakes were growing by the hour. Each evening, she sat beside him in the softly lit study, poring over data, matching contracts, emails, internal memos. They were tracing footprints in digital sand, deliberate, well-concealed moves made by someone who had known the system inside and out. But Bryceland's eye for detail and Landon's intimate knowledge of company infrastructure made them a formidable pair. One cold night, as rain pelted the windows and a thunderstorm rumbled over the city, Bryceland discovered the final piece. Troy Halden isn't working alone, she said. spinning her laptop to face Landon. I traced the payments from Wessler Solutions. There's a secondary account. It funnels into an entity called Barricade Group Holdings, offshore, Cayman Islands. Landon's brow furrowed. That's not one of our affiliates. No. But look here. 5 years ago, Crotech bid on a sustainability contract in Europe. We lost to Barricade Group. Guess who was working there at the time? She pulled up a scanned personnel profile. A photo appeared. A woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a cruel smile. Victoria Lance, former board member at Crotech. Resigned 4 years ago after a heated internal conflict. She's the real architect, Bryceland said. Troy's just the puppet. She set this up long before she left. This was personal. Landon stared at the screen, jaw clenched. His voice was quiet when he spoke. She wanted to destroy me. Bryceland nodded. And she almost did. He stood and began pacing. For the first time in days, his energy returned. Not panicked, but purposeful. I can bring this to the board, he said. To the press, show the evidence, turn the tide. You have to be careful. If we push too fast, they'll spin it, make it look like you're shifting blame. I won't let her win. Bryceland hesitated. Then you'll need more than proof. You'll need someone credible to verify it. Someone outside the company. Landon turned to her. Then we call in someone who can't be bought. The next morning, they contacted a well-respected independent auditor, a hard-nosed firm with a reputation for honesty. Landon met with their lead investigator, presenting the evidence with Bryceland at his side. She spoke confidently, pointing out financial inconsistencies, false vendor registrations, laundering pathways, all the fruits of her painstaking work. The lead auditor, a stern woman named Cressida Flint, was impressed. We'll verify everything. But if this holds, Mr. Crow, it's not just your company's name that'll be restored. You may very well dismantle an international fraud ring. By the end of the week, Cressida's team confirmed everything. Victoria Lance's web of shell companies spanned 5 countries. Troy Halden had signed every document. It was airtight, but Landon hesitated to go public. Are you afraid? Bryceland asked softly as they sat together in the quiet study one evening. No, he said after a pause. I'm thinking about the people who will lose their jobs when this hits. The branches she infected, entire divisions may go under. Bryceland nodded. But what's the alternative? Let her keep bleeding you dry? He looked at her then, really looked. There was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not fear, not pride, but a silent plea. A question. Stay, he whispered. She blinked. What? When this goes live, when the truth explodes and the dust begins to settle, I'll need someone beside me who didn't walk away. Not because I'm Landon Crow, but because you believe in me. Her heart clenched. I'm not going anywhere, she said. That night, Landon released the story. He held a press conference streamed live across national outlets, standing before a backdrop bearing Crotech's logo, flanked by Cressida Flint and the lead investigators. He presented the evidence, the timeline, the betrayal. He didn't hide his mistakes. He admitted the gaps in oversight, but he stood tall, honest, and composed. Victoria Lance was arrested 2 days later in a coordinated international sting. Troy Halden vanished, but was picked up at a private airport attempting to flee under a false identity. Landon returned home to a quiet house. The victory felt hollow. Exhaustion clung to him like smoke. But when he opened the door, Bryceland was there, barefoot, wearing one of his oversized shirts, a warm meal waiting on the table. The study was dark for once. The only light came from the fireplace and the reflection in her tired eyes. He stepped closer. You did it, she whispered. He shook his head gently. We did it. He cupped her face with both hands, hesitant at first, then surer. She leaned into him and he finally allowed the walls to fall. When their lips met, it wasn't sudden or desperate. It was quiet, steady, inevitable. 2 broken people finding safety in each other at last. And outside, for the first time in weeks, the storm had finally passed. The weeks following the scandal's resolution passed in a blur of headlines, board meetings, damage control, and cautious optimism. Crotech's name had been cleared, but the wounds left behind by betrayal and corporate sabotage were deep. Several branches had to be reorganized. Entire departments were dissolved and rebuilt. Landon found himself facing a different kind of pressure. less public, more personal. Restoring the company's financial strength was one battle. Rebuilding trust among his people was another. Yet through it all, Bryslin remained by his side. She wasn't just his assistant anymore. That role had long since evolved into something far more complex, more intimate. She was the first person he saw each morning, often curled on the couch with a coffee and a laptop, buried in spreadsheets or planning strategies for community outreach. She was the one he called during board meetings to verify a detail no one else had thought to check. The one who walked beside him into auditor briefings and client dinners, not as a decoration but as an equal. And somewhere along the line, though neither of them dared define it too early, she had become the center of his quiet moments too, the one he reached for when the weight of the day grew too heavy. One evening, well after midnight, Landon stood on the rooftop balcony of his penthouse, dressed in black slacks and a white button-down rolled to the elbows. The city shimmered below, lit by thousands of tiny windows glowing in the dark. Bryslin joined him silently, barefoot, wrapped in a soft gray cardigan she had stolen from his closet. "I spoke to the board today," he said without looking at her. "They've agreed to let me restructure the community division. I want to create a program for underprivileged youth. Focus on girls who aged out of the system like Avery's daughter," Bryslin finished, stepping closer. He nodded slowly. "It still keeps me up at night, wondering where she ended up. Whether she's safe, whether she even knows who she really is." Bryslin reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Maybe one day you'll find her. Or maybe she'll find you." He looked at her then, the wind tugging gently at his hair. "I'm not sure I'd know what to say. Start with, 'I'm sorry,' and then, 'I never stopped looking.' That's enough." They stood in silence for a long time, listening to the distant hum of the city. Eventually, he turned to her, eyes reflecting both the skyline and something more vulnerable. "I bought a place," he said. She blinked. "A place?" "Out of the city. Quiet, near a lake. There's a small cottage on the property, but I want to build a house beside it. Something simple, open, peaceful." Bryslin's heart skipped. "That sounds beautiful. I want you there, with me." She stared at him, words failing for a moment. "Landon, are you sure?" "Everything is still. I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said, stepping closer, lowering his voice. "I spent years building walls. You walked right through them. You saw every broken piece of me, and instead of walking away, you stayed." She smiled, tears quietly rising. "Because I saw someone worth staying for." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. It's not just about rebuilding the company anymore. It's about building a life with you." She kissed him then, soft and certain, their hands holding each other like anchors. In that moment, high above the city where their story began, the chaos of the world felt far away. All that remained was the wind, the warmth of shared breath, and the undeniable truth that they had become each other's home. In the weeks that followed, they visited the property together. A lush piece of land overlooking still waters, framed by old trees and wildflowers. They walked hand in hand along the shore, imagining rooms and gardens, a future filled with sunrises and soft laughter. They began drawing plans, not just for walls and windows, but for the life they would build inside them. And as they stood together under a pale morning sky, Bryslin realized something she hadn't been able to admit even to herself. This wasn't just a chapter in her life. It was a new beginning. A home not made of wood or stone, but of trust, love, and the unlikeliest journey that had started with a borrowed van and a desperate hope. Spring arrived with a softness that blanketed everything in new beginnings. The lake near the cottage shimmered under the morning sun, framed by delicate cherry blossoms and the green hush of waking trees. Construction on the main house had officially begun. Wooden beams reached upward like open arms. The scent of sawdust and fresh earth filled the air. But more than the building itself, it was the quiet joy between Landon and Bryslin that signaled how far they had come. The cottage, though small, had become their sanctuary during the transition. It was cluttered with blueprints, laptop cords, coffee mugs, and the lingering warmth of late-night conversations. Bryslin had painted the kitchen a pale robin's egg blue. Landon, surprisingly, had grown fond of tending to the wild herb garden just outside the porch. Their days blended into a rhythm neither had expected to crave. Shared silences, slow kisses, laughter over burnt toast, and whispered dreams at midnight. One morning, as the mist still hovered low over the lake, Brislin sat curled on the front steps, sipping tea and watching the sun slowly lift above the treetops. Her fingers absently rubbed at the silver ring on her hand. Simple, elegant, a promise made under no spotlight, with no fanfare. Just Landon, kneeling in the garden with dirt on his jeans, eyes full of certainty, asking her not just for forever, but for peace, partnership, and truth. She had said yes before he even finished the question. Inside the cottage, Landon was on a video call with a foundation board. He had officially launched the Avery Gray Initiative the previous week, named in honor of his sister. The program focused on providing mentorship, education, and housing resources for young women transitioning out of foster care. Brislin had helped draft the mission statement, build the team, and handpick the first 5 scholarship recipients. The work was hard, emotional, and at times overwhelming, but it was real. It mattered. And yet, the day held something unexpected. Around noon, as she sorted through a box of her Uncle Melvin's old documents, papers she had meant to file away long ago, Brislin stumbled upon a small, yellowed envelope. No return address. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, shaky. Her name was written in block letters, Brislin Gray. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a birth certificate. Her birth certificate. Only it wasn't what she expected. Her mother's name was listed as Avery Leona Gray. The father's name line was blank. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the paper, her heart hammering against her ribs. For several seconds, she couldn't think, couldn't move. She read it again and again. Then she slowly sat back down on the porch step, the weight of the truth settling into her chest like a stone dropped in water. Avery. Her mother had been Avery, which meant Landon. She covered her mouth with both hands as a soft gasp escaped her lips. The implications crashed into her like waves. The photos he kept, the years he spent searching, the story he had told her of a lost niece. She was her. She was the girl he had never stopped looking for. Hours passed before she found the strength to speak. Landon had finished his meetings and was leaning against the porch railing, watching her with concern. "You've been quiet," he said gently. She stood slowly, the envelope clutched in her hands. "I need to tell you something, and I think it's going to change everything." He straightened. "What is it?" She handed him the birth certificate, her fingers trembling. Landon read it once, then again. His eyes moved across the page, slowly, methodically, before lifting to meet hers. There was no explosion of emotion, no dramatic reaction, just silence. And then the soft cracking of his voice. "Your mother was Avery." "Yes," Brislin whispered, "which means I'm your niece." He stepped back, the paper still in his hands, his expression stunned. "You were right," she continued. "I got lost in the system. After she died, I was shuffled between homes. I ended up with Uncle Melvin when I was 5. He told me my mother's name was Angela. Maybe he was trying to protect me. I don't know, but I never knew the truth." Landon sank onto the step beside her, burying his face in his hands. She sat beside him in silence, letting the wind carry their thoughts. Finally, he looked up, his eyes wet but calm. "All these years," he murmured, "I've looked for you in the shadows of the world, and you were right in front of me." She reached for his hand and he didn't pull away. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear. I believe you." They sat like that for a long time, the birds chirping softly around them, the scent of wildflowers drifting through the air. Eventually, Landon turned to her, a bittersweet smile on his lips. "Then I guess I'm not marrying you." Brislin let out a shaky laugh, tears in her eyes. "No, I suppose not. But I haven't lost you," he said quietly. "I finally found you." She nodded, pressing her forehead to his shoulder. "No matter what else changes," she whispered, "that won't." In the days that followed, they navigated the shift together, carefully, with love, with grief for the time lost, and gratitude for the miracle of reunion. Landon introduced her to family she didn't know she had. Brislin became both a symbol and a soul for the Avery Gray Initiative, inspiring others who had also felt forgotten. The house beside the lake was still built, but now not as a home for two lovers, but as a sanctuary for healing, for rediscovery, and for legacy. And though their relationship transformed, the bond between them only grew stronger. They had met by accident, but they had found each other by fate. And in doing so, they had rewritten their stories. From tragedy to triumph, from silence to family, from searching to home. The ending of the story resonates deeply with me because it embodies the idea that even amidst profound loss, hardship, and secrets buried for years, there exists the capacity for redemption and the healing power of family. In my view, the climax, where the protagonist discovers her true identity and the complex intertwined destinies of her and Landon, serves as a striking reminder that our past, no matter how painful, can lead us toward unexpected connections and transformative new beginnings. This turning point was crafted not merely as a dramatic twist, but as a catalyst for hope and reconciliation, emphasizing that even in the midst of betrayal and hidden truths, there lies an opportunity for new bonds to form and old wounds to slowly mend. Ultimately, I believe the story's conclusion suggests that our fates are not solely defined by the tragedies we experience, but by the strength we muster to embrace the truth, rebuild what was lost, and create a future imbued with both love and authenticity.